everyone. My name is Campbell Stewart. I'm the school social worker here at Beaverton High School. And I'm excited to be here today with some of my amazing colleagues in some of our neighboring high schools in the Beaverton School District for a really important week. Many of you may think that you can only talk to a mental health professional about feelings of suicide or depression. But today is about a partnership with all of the teachers in your building and helping you to understand that while yes, you can talk to your school social worker or your school counselor or school psychologist, but we also want you to know that there's lots of caring and trusted adults in the building that are okay having conversations with you about suicide and helping you to get to the help you need. So I'm going to pass it off to my colleagues to introduce themselves and we'll take it from there.
Hi everyone, I'm Dina Schreiner and I'm the social worker at Sunsets High School. Go Apollos! As you might know by now, the district has marked this week to have an intentional district-wide focus on suicide prevention. We know that suicide is impacting the lives of young people more than ever, and now that we're in a CDL environment, that just puts our risk even higher during this time of distance learning.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Wartz. I'm the new social worker at Mountainside. Go Mavs! So the good news is there are caring adults at your school who are here to listen and get you connected to meaningful help and support. Today we're partnering with your teachers to provide information and have honest discussions about some of the misinformation out there around mental disorders and suicide.
Hi everyone, I'm Robin Crocker and I am the school psychologist at the Beaverton High School. We care for all of you and we hope that you participate in this conversation so we can all learn from each other and help create a more supportive school community. We need your help to fight against the stigma that's out there and around our mental health needs and seeking help. We all need some help at some times in our lives and no one should suffer alone. Please know that if any of this information stirs up anything for you, or you're worried about your friends or a loved one, your teachers, school counselors, school psychologists, or social workers are on standby to connect with you.
Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about reducing stigma around mental health and depression. Our objectives for today are to talk about the stigma around mental health, review some of the myths and realities about mental health disorders, and consider attitudes about mental health disorders, and talk about realistic and positive understanding of mental health disorders. Before we begin, I'd kind of like to talk about how we're going to create a safe space and some of the logistics. Myself and your teacher who are leading this Zoom today are mandatory reporters, which means that if someone in this space is at harm of or at risk of harming themselves or someone else, we are required by law to report that. With the exception of that, this space is going to be a sacred, confidential space. So what we talk about here stays here. Let's talk about why we're going to talk about suicide today. So this is coming from Senate Bill 52, which requires that all schools have a suicide prevention program and talk about suicide intervention to all students. This comes from a Portland area high school student who completed suicide in 2017. Her name was Addie. Addie was a trans individual who was supported and loved dearly by her friends and her family. However, Addie was an activist who sought to change the world, and her family is committed to ensuring that we continue her fight for justice. Part of her legacy is ensuring that we take critical steps to create a more loving, affirming world for many students like Addie who stand out because of their differences. Together, we're going to create a safe space by listening to others' perspectives, maintaining confidentiality, participating, but also being mindful that today might bring up the feels for us in this space and that it's okay to pass and to participate at our comfort level. We're also going to respect each other's differences. While we're going through today's curriculum, I'm going to invite you to keep this essential question in the back of your mind. How can someone reduce the stigma related to mental health disorders? Move into the part of the presentation that is more of a brainstorming, dialogue, group discussion. So please, to the teacher running this video, please take a moment to pause when you feel appropriate and invite your students to have a discussion about some of these questions. Our first question is, what does the term mental health disorder really refer to? So some examples is mental health disorders is a term which is a wide range of conditions that affect our mood, our thinking, and our behavior. Some examples are clinical depression, which is marked by persistently depressed mood or loss of interest in daily activities. Anxiety disorder, which is also a mental health disorder characterized by feelings of worry, anxiety, or fear that's strong enough to interfere with your daily activities. Or bipolar disorder. This is a disorder that's marked by episodes of mood swings ranging from depression lows to manic highs. Is there a link between depression and suicide? Sometimes depression feels unbearable. Some people get to the point where life doesn't seem worth living. Suicidal thoughts are not unusual, and they're nothing to be ashamed of. They're a sign that it's time to talk to somebody and get some help. Many people don't realize that depression is treatable and never reach out for support. And many people who die by suicide also have a mental or emotional disorder, including depression being the most common. Other issues related to suicide are relationship problems, substance use, physical health problems, and other life stressors. I think it's important that we go over myths and facts around mental health disorders and suicide. So let's take a moment and I'm going to ask you some questions. Myth or fact? Teenagers who talk about suicide are doing it for attention. Fact. Teens do need attention. There is something that's going on that's causing them to feel this way. They need people to listen and professionals to help them. All teenagers who are depressed are suicidal. Myth. Most people will experience times in their lives where they are depressed, but do not have suicidal ideation. Suicide people really want to die, and there's no way to stop them. Myth. They are depressed and they need help. With help, they can feel better and find other solutions. Talking about suicide will cause a person to attempt suicide. Myth. It's actually the opposite. Not talking about it could escalate the problem. Even thinking about it makes the suicidal person feel worse, but talking about it will help bring understanding and relieve the suicidal students' thoughts and get them help that they need. Discussing it openly shows that you're a person who takes it seriously and that you care. If a person really wants to kill themselves, no one has the right to stop them. Myth. We would help a person who is physically sick or injured, and we need to help a person who is mentally ill.
Now we're going to talk about, what does the word stigma mean? So I want you to take a moment and just, without looking the word up, write down your best description for this word. Maybe how you've heard that used in your lifetime, and particularly how you've heard that used around people living with mental health disorders. So we have a few different definitions here that are taken from different sources and different historical periods. So as a class, I invite you all to read through these. I think everybody sort of has their own definition, but this just helps to give everybody some context of what we're really talking about when we're talking about stigma. Some of the terms that are related to stigma are things like stereotype, which is a person or thing that conforms to an unjustly fixed impression or attitude. And stereotypes are attitudes about a group of people. For example, all people with mental illness are dangerous. Another term that may be related is prejudice or a preconceived opinion. Or maybe that's agreeing with the stereotype. types, like I think people with mental illness are dangerous. And then discrimination as unfavorable treatment based on prejudice. Discrimination is the behavior that results. I don't want people with mental illness around me, therefore I discriminate against them by not hiring them, not being friends with them, etc. So looking at these terms, we can see how harmful stigma can be around helping people to access support and come forward when they are experiencing symptoms of mental health disorders. And I want you all to think about, how do these definitions compare to the definition that you wrote for the word stigma? And we understand that this may be a new concept for you, but it's also something that we really want to talk about because it is one of the biggest barriers for students in terms of accessing help, because the fear of that stigma of how others are going to perceive you or how others are going to treat you. And once we start to sort of really understand what stigma is, then we can all take little actions every day to help address it. What is the relationship between stigma, discrimination, prejudice, and discrimination? And how could this impact someone with a mental health disorder? So I want you all to, as a class, with your teacher, to just pause for a moment and have some discussion around those relationships and how those different things intersect. The stigma of mental health disorders. Stigma refers to a cluster of negative attitudes and beliefs that motivate the general public to fear, reject, avoid, and discriminate against people with mental illnesses. It's not just a matter of using the wrong word or action, it's about disrespect. It is the use of negative labels to identify a person living with mental illness. And it's a barrier. Fear of stigma and the resulting discrimination discourages individuals and their families from getting the help that they need. I'm curious as a class if you all can continue the discussion around what might that look like? What have you seen in your school community when people are talking about mental health needs? Do you see people having favorable conversations about it? Do you see people encouraging help-seeking behaviors? Do you see people using negative stereotypes and discrimination against other students or staff that they may think is experiencing a mental health disorder?
Now that we've discussed stigma, we're going to go ahead and take a personal attitude survey. Your teacher's going to help you with this. Once we are done, we're going to come back and discuss the results. This should take just a few minutes. So what were your results? Can you talk about some of the general observations that you and your peers had regarding your attitudes of mental illness or mental health disorders? What surprised you? Is there anything that made you think a little bit more about mental health and how we can decrease stigma around it? Is there anything or any way to use this information to create change in your school around how people talk about and view mental health? So there are some ways to reduce stigma. Even though there's no simple strategy, there are some positive steps that we can take. We can remember the acronym WALLS to help reduce stigma. One way to remember this might be to think that a wall is a barrier, right? So how can we bring down the walls? The W stands for watch your language. So make sure you're not using language and comments that stigmatize people with mental illness. How often have we heard somebody say something like, "Oh, that's crazy," or "the weather's bipolar today"? You need to think about your language when you're using it and how it might impact somebody who is living with mental illness. The A stands for ask questions. So a lot can be learned by asking questions of a mental health professional, like a counselor, a doctor, or a person who has lived experience with mental illness. The first L stands for learn more. So there are some great resources available online to help educate you on different mental illnesses. Increased education means fewer misunderstandings and fewer stigma. The second L stands for listen to experiences. Once you've learned a bit more about mental illness, consider asking someone you know about their experience with mental illness. If you are considerate and respectful, they may be comfortable speaking about their experiences with you. If you yourself have lived experience, Consider sharing your experience with others so you can educate them. And the S stands for speak out. Help reduce stigma by speaking out when others stigmatize people with mental health disorders.
Now we're going to watch a video entitled Voices. After the video, your class is going to have a chance to discuss a few of your observations. Now that you've watched that video, what stood out to you from the video? Why is it important to reduce the stigma associated with mental health disorders in our society? And whose responsibility is it to reduce the stigma associated with mental health disorders? Take a moment with your class and chat a little bit about these questions. So who can you go to for help? If you or someone you know is going through a health crisis, please use some of the following resources to get help. There's no shame at all in asking for help, and almost all the resources offer free, anonymous, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week help. So where can you ask for help? You can ask a trusted adult, you can ask your school counselor, you can visit our school wellness centers, you can check in with the school social worker, and each building has a school psychologist who works with it as well. Remember, too many young people won't seek out the help that they need for their mental health disorder because of the stigma of being labeled as mentally ill or people thinking, I'm just crazy. We've got to make an effort to shift this mindset. Here are some resources that you can look up online to get some help for yourself. Thank you so much for participating. If you have any other further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us, your school counselor, a trusted adult, your teacher, parent. Please ask for help and help reduce the stigma. Thanks.